I owned an Airbnb house for several years. I stopped due to the stress of keeping up with it, as well as maintaining my actual job. The benefit of using Airbnb instead of renting the place out like you normally would is that you would have the chance to make a lot more money if your house gets booked a lot. Being in a relatively high traffic area for vacations, Airbnb was a great option for us. My wife and I were excited in the beginning, but it got more demanding as more people booked the house. We needed to keep everything on schedule and hire cleaning services after the first customers left and before the next ones came, as well as be sure to respond to their messages and emails in a timely manner. But things were going well for a couple years before we had what we thought was a young couple staying at the house. Just like every other time, when they arrived, I texted them the unlock code for the door. I almost never actually see the customers. After they let me know that they were inside and everything was good, I sat back and relaxed for the rest of my day off. I should also mention that I almost never even talk to the customers more than just a couple texts. Usually they text me when they get there and when they leave, and sometimes an occasional question about the house, but that's usually it. But as 9 o'clock came around and I was just about to get ready for bed, I got a text from the young man staying at the house. It was short, saying he was going to call me in a minute, and then a minute later he called. I already had a bad feeling when I saw the text, but what he said still surprised me. He said that the water wasn't working in the house. Of course, I apologized, though I didn't understand how that could be possible. But living in a house without water is unacceptable, so I knew I had to get it fixed immediately. I asked if I could come check it out really quick so that I could have someone come in the morning to fix it. He agreed, being very polite about the whole thing, and I drove over there a few minutes later. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed 2 cars. At the time, this wasn't necessarily a red flag, but more just an odd thing I noticed because they were apparently a young couple on vacation for a single night, so I didn't understand why they would rent 2 separate cars. I thought someone must be visiting them, which actually isn't allowed, but I didn't mind so much. I walked up to the front door and knocked, before entering the code and walking inside. It was very quiet. I expected them to be waiting for me, but they weren't anywhere that I could see. I probably should have looked around for them first, but I was tired and just wanted to get this over with. The first thing I wanted to check was the main water valve to make sure there wasn't a leak or a flood, so I went down to the basement and over to the valve. Everything seemed normal, no water anywhere or signs of damage. I was confused, but then I fiddled with the valve and immediately heard water start rushing again. I turned it more, realizing it had been completely shut off manually. I stayed in the basement for another minute, trying to understand why this was done, before I started to get a really uncomfortable feeling, especially since I didn't even see the people when I walked inside. I just couldn't see how it could have been anyone other than them who turned off the water, which meant they were trying to get me to come over on purpose, or maybe give them a discount on their stay for the inconvenience. I decided I was going to leave and get in my car, then try calling them back just to be safe. I got up and started walking towards the stairs, until I heard the basement door open, followed by multiple sets of footsteps walking down. When they got to the bottom, 3 men stood there. "Is it fixed?" one of them said, sounding like the same man I talked to on the phone, though all of these men were much older than the young man that I thought was staying at the house. I told him it should be working now, and that the valve must have just tightened on its own. I was trying not to point any blame, since the whole thing was making me so uncomfortable. I just wanted to get out of that basement and away from these guys. They all just kind of stood there looking at me, not saying anything after that. "Well, let me know if you need anything else," I said, walking between them, trying to get to the stairs. They still just stood there, watching me walk around them, but as I went past the 3rd guy closest to the stairs, I spotted a gun shoved in the back of his pants. It made me freak out a little, and I rushed a bit quicker up the stairs, but they didn't follow. They stayed in the basement as I quickly walked out the door and drove away. When I got home, I woke up my wife and told her what had happened. She convinced me to call the police to check up on them. They weren't the people we thought were staying there, and the situation was strange, so it felt justified. I think we waited 20 minutes before a call came from an officer claiming nobody seemed to be home and that he may need me to open the door. I gave him the code instead, and he called back another 20 minutes later, saying that there was no signs of anyone still being there. The next day, we found out the card the man paid with was stolen, and after looking around the house, they had stolen some expensive decorations and appliances as well. I guess there never actually was a young couple either. The one thing that was left unexplained was their whole plan with the water not working. I think they either wanted me to not charge them for their stay, so that hopefully they could use the stolen card for longer, or they were planning on robbing me at gunpoint. But then that makes me question why they didn't. 3 dangerous, unidentified men blocking my exit in the basement after leading me into a trap, and they just let me go. It doesn't make sense to me, but after that, I never went to the house while customers were home, and a few months later, we stopped using Airbnb and just put the house up for rent. I was taking a solo trip to Salt Lake City last year. I'd never actually had the chance to go on many vacations before, and when I did, it was always with my family. This was the first time I was finally going to get to enjoy my time somewhere else all by myself. I know it sounds a bit weird, but being alone is fine with me, especially since I'd never get to be alone. Anyway, I looked up both hotels and Airbnbs in the area, and surprisingly, the Airbnbs were a lot nicer and less pricey. However, all the cheaper ones were a bit further away from the city. I was driving my own car though, so I didn't care too much about having to travel a bit to the city, and went with a nicely sized Airbnb. It was small, but the kitchen and bedroom were nice, which was all I really cared about. I got there at 6 on Sunday morning. The owner texted me the password and I brought all of my stuff inside. It was really nice, much better than the small apartment I shared with my roommate. Once I got everything inside and set up, I hopped on the couch and turned on the TV. It was a 10-hour drive, so I was looking forward to chilling for the night and enjoying the silence. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but it was only around 7 o'clock, so my body woke me up a few hours later. The time was just past 10 and the TV was still on. I grabbed the remote and turned it off, then got up to get a glass of water before going to the bedroom. As I walked from the living room to the kitchen, I felt a strong, cold breeze brush against me. With my tired eyes, I looked to my right and saw the front door was fully open. My eyes shot open and my heart pounded. I stared at the door for a moment, then looked around the room. I knew I had closed it and locked it, so this was really freaking me out. I walked over to the door and closed it softly, listening intently for any sounds of someone being inside. For reference, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I am fairly tall and in shape, so unless an intruder had a gun, I felt confident I could force them away. I grabbed a kitchen knife, still being quiet, and walked room to room, checking every inch of the house. Nobody was there. This only confused me more, and I sent a text to the homeowner asking if someone was supposed to come over tonight or something, explaining what happened. It was late though, so I didn't expect a response right away. I went around to every door, locking each one, then quickly checked the house again. While more awake than I was before, I was still really tired. I went to bed and fell asleep with no trouble. When I woke up though, I was much less calm than I was before. I heard something from outside. Not outside the house, but outside my bedroom door. I didn't know what to do and kind of just froze, waiting for whoever was outside the room to do something first. As I sat there in bed, I thought about how the person could have possibly gotten in. The only person who would have the password to the door was the homeowner, So honestly, in that moment, I was sure it was him. This gave me more courage, thinking it must be some creepy guy who likes to spy on the people who stay at his Airbnb. I got out of bed, still not having heard anything else, and grabbed my phone from the nightstand to call the cops. I must have made too much noise though, because almost right away, someone started running away from the door and toward the front of the house. That only frightened me more, knowing the intruder was standing right next to the bedroom door the entire time. I dialed 911, but during the time it took for the cops to arrive, nothing else happened. The person had left. I found a hotel to stay at for the rest of the vacation, but what's crazy is that the owner of the Airbnb gave me a refund, as he was able to prove it wasn't him. He was very concerned about it, and he was actually a really nice old man. It was already creepy enough when I thought it was the owner, but knowing that it was just some random guy makes it even worse. I don't know how he was able to get in, or why he was stalking me, but it still gives me chills thinking about it. The part I think about the most is waking up and seeing the front door open. Now that I know that someone was actually in the house, that meant that whoever it was came in and saw me asleep on the couch, then proceeded to do whatever it was they came there to do. It's just really unnerving and creepy, and makes me never want to be at an Airbnb alone. I was staying at a small 2-bedroom Airbnb during a vacation I took last year. This place was on the way to another Airbnb that I was going to stay at for the main portion of the vacation, but this was more of just a rest stop for the night. The place was clean and empty, just as expected when I arrived. I walked around the whole house to check it out before bringing in my luggage and sitting on the couch. It was probably 8 p.m. by this time of night. As I sat, dozing off a little, the doorbell ringing made me jolt awake. I looked over at the front door, confused and alarmed. I was a pretty small, young girl, so it's safe to say I'm often scared easily and don't like talking to strangers, especially at night when I'm alone. I got up and walked over to the door, hearing 2 men whispering to each other on the other side. The door didn't have a safety lock or anything, so I just kept the door shut and called out to them. "Hello? Hey, we're here for the Airbnb. Can you open the door?" A man called out. I loudly asked what they meant, not understanding what being here for the Airbnb was supposed to mean. He responded, saying that he had the place booked for the night. I knew there had to be some sort of mistake, so I told him, still yelling through the door, that I had it booked as well and that he needed to contact the owner. The man didn't seem happy about that, although if I were in his position, I'd be pretty upset too. I heard one pair of footsteps walk away from the door, while the other man asked again if I could open the door so that we could talk about it. I was about to give in, putting my hand on the doorknob, thinking that he seemed believable, but something came over me telling me to just play it safe. I said my husband would be down to figure it out in a few minutes. I didn't want them to think I was alone, so I was hoping that would catch him off guard if something was bad. The man didn't respond though. I waited for another minute because I didn't hear any footsteps leaving, but then I moved the short curtain to the side and looked out the small window. The man I'd seemingly been talking to was facing towards his car parked in the driveway, and past him was one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. A group of maybe 5 people was standing further down the driveway, kind of hiding as if waiting for a signal. They all had some form of face coverings, and I couldn't see the other side of the door, but I assumed there were even more people over there. Knowing that this was very likely a gang due to the city I was staying in, I was completely horrified. I backed away from the door, fully panicked and trying not to hyperventilate. I then went to the bedroom to get my phone and call the police, and I could hear more footsteps all around the house. It was like I was surrounded by a pack of wolves who at any minute could crush the windows and break inside. I took my phone into the bathroom with me and called 911, trying to remain calm. The operator also told me to be quiet and stay calm, as they were sending a group my way and would be there in just a few minutes. I stayed on the line, still hearing footsteps walking around outside the place, until the horrible sound of wood bending and then snapping came from the front door. I was crying profusely now, trying to muffle my mouth with my hand. I listened as a whole group of people ran inside, opening doors and cabinets before one approached the bathroom door and tried the handle. "Here," he yelled, then walked away. The group continued looting the house before sirens were heard in the distance and they began to scatter out of the place. They had all left by the time the police got inside, and all of my luggage was gone, and my car had its windows shattered and was looted as well. One of the officers sat with me to discuss some details, and he informed me that they've been having problems with large groups or gangs breaking into homes recently. They don't think the main goal is to hurt the residents at all, but rather to just rob them of everything, so that's likely why they left me alone in the bathroom, knowing I wasn't a threat. Whether their intentions were to harm me or not, it was still terrifying. I know it likely had little to do with me staying at the Airbnb that night, but it has still made me really anxious every single time I stay at an Airbnb now. I was using Craigslist as a means of selling some of my old, unused things I had stashed away in my house. I had plans to move out in the next few months, so I was just trying to organize what I needed from what I didn't need, and that's when I found my old motor tools. They were high quality and still functional, but I had gotten battery-powered ones to replace them not long ago. With no use for them anymore, I took a couple pictures and posted them up on Craigslist. I had listed a power drill, driver, and matching tool set for $80. Considering they weren't that old and still fully functional, this was a really good deal. It didn't take long to get responses. In just an hour, I got 2 replies to my post. One of them emailed me asking if $50 would be okay, but I politely declined. The other reply stated that they were very interested and wanted to buy them that same night for the listed price. I agreed and said I was available at 5 if he wanted to swing by and pick them up. I never let anyone into my house when selling things. I'd always just bring the stuff out to my driveway and talk to them there. It was a well-trafficked neighborhood street, so I wasn't worried about anyone attempting something out in the open. As I usually did, I was going to stand out in the driveway with the items a bit before 5 and wait for them so that I could make the transaction as quick as possible. But just past 4:30, there was a knock at the door. I looked out, seeing a man standing there with his red car parked in the driveway. I opened the door a crack, asking who he was. The man said he was here to buy the tools that were on Craigslist and admitted to being early. I told him to hold on for a minute and to just wait in his car, as I wasn't expecting him yet. He hesitated, making the interaction more awkward than it should have been, but then he turned around. Once he walked away, I got all the tools together and met him at the top of the driveway. I had an outlet outside for him to test the tools with, and he seemed satisfied with them. "How about 20? He said while holding the drill. "The deal was 80. I can do a little lower, but 20 is too low," I said nicely, though I was slightly annoyed because he had already agreed to pay $80 for them, and $20 was just a total ripoff. He put the drill down, and without even looking at me, he walked back to his car and drove away. I was confused and upset, feeling like I'd been played and just had wasted my time. I got the tools back inside and just went on with my night, trying not to let myself get too upset about it. Really, it was just a small inconvenience. At least, that's what I thought. A couple hours later, I walked by the front windows, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw that same red car. It was parked just down the road, 3 houses away from mine. I looked closely, trying to be sure that it was that same man, but nobody was inside it. It was an empty parked car, so I had no way of knowing for sure. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence and carried on. Another hour would go by. I was just going on with my night, making food and watching TV, but then someone knocked on my door. I was a little shaken, but chose to ignore it and hope that whoever it was would go away. Obviously, the man from earlier was my first thought. Only 30 seconds passed before they knocked again. "Hey, it's me. I decided I'll take the tools. I brought the money," he yelled from the other side of the door. I didn't believe him at all. It all came together in my mind that that car that I'd seen an hour ago was his, meaning that he'd been stalking my house all night. I didn't respond and instead called the police, informing them of the man's name and the car he had. The man called out several more times, saying he wanted to buy the tools, but then it went silent for a minute. I was still standing by my couch, looking toward the front door. Another minute passed. I wasn't sure what to do. The police were already on their way and would be here any minute, so I felt safe enough to be able to check out the windows. I quietly walked over to the window that was beside the door. But then suddenly, I heard something hit the side of the house with great force. The sound was followed by leaves rustling and footsteps running away. I looked out the window and saw the guy running with a limp down to his car. The police turned in at the perfect time though, stopping him halfway. It surprised me to hear that the man admitted to a lot. He said he planned on robbing me, but I wouldn't let him into the house, which complicated things for him. Additionally, he tried climbing the tree on the side of my house and jumping onto the roof, but he missed, hitting the side and falling on his leg. The thing is though, he was armed with a knife, and the roof he tried to jump on was just under my second-story window, which after checking, was unlocked. So, if he had made the jump, he actually would have gotten inside. He claimed it was just an attempted robbery, but claims are just that. I stopped using Craigslist, and even to this day, I lock every single window in my house, even the ones that I think are unreachable. I used Craigslist many years ago to find a room for rent. I was looking for a house to stay at and be able to split rent with a roommate or roommates. It took maybe a week to find a place that was suitable for me and several phone calls with the owner before I was ready to move in. The owner who was to be my roommate seemed like a really normal, nice guy who was similar in age as me. He told me all about the place and what to expect, and I also felt like we connected well. With everything seeming perfect, I was getting really excited. I didn't have much to move, so I packed it all up and stuffed it in the trunk of my car, and in just a few days, I drove out 30 minutes to my soon-to-be home. It was located outside of the main town and in more of a woodsy terrain. It had a long driveway leading far from the road. Pulling in though, it was not as I'd expected. It was a very old wooden home. I knew it was passed down from his parents, but this place looked to be at least 100 years old. The pictures of the inside that I'd seen on Craigslist looked to be fairly modern, so I assumed they had to have done some pretty big renovations. I left everything in my car as I went up to the door and knocked. Aaron, the owner, came and showed me around. While the outside was not so impressive, the inside was the opposite. Very well maintained, clean, and definitely had been renovated not long ago. I was really happy with everything and moved my things in that night. Several days went by with no issues. It didn't even feel like I'd found this place on Craigslist. It felt like I was just living with a friend. Aaron worked in town though, so he was gone most of the time, and I worked from home, so I got to have the whole house to myself. Well, not the whole house. There was one door that was always locked. It wasn't any of my business, and I knew that, so I never brought it up with Aaron. But it still got me wondering. It was almost definitely the basement door, but this was odd because he said the house was a one-story home, not mentioning anything about having a basement. Another couple days went by before something happened. Aaron brought home some fast food for dinner, and then went to bed early because he had work the next day. I stayed up a while longer, then did the same. Laying in bed though, I had trouble falling asleep. There wasn't any reason for this, it was just one of those nights. But after a while, I heard Aaron's bedroom door open. I was listening because there was nothing else to do, but no sounds came. I waited a whole 2 or 3 minutes before he started walking, slowly, down the hall towards my door. Just as he was passing though, he stopped. I heard the floorboards creak, followed by the door thump softly, as if he was pressing up against it. He stayed there behind the door for a while. I don't even know how long, but then he walked away. Not back toward his room, but the other way, toward the main hallway. Then a door opened and closed. I didn't know what to think. It was really weird and creepy, but also I'd known Aaron for a while now and didn't see him as a weird person. But what was he doing? And where did he go? I stayed awake as long as I could, waiting to hear him come back, but he never did. Over the next few nights, I noticed a pattern. Every time I would go to bed, about 30 minutes later, Aaron would open his door, stand still for a minute, then walk to my door, stand still again, then leave and go into the locked door. He never slept in his room. He always slept somewhere behind the weird locked door. What made it so creepy was that he was trying so hard to keep a secret from me. I decided one night that I was going to figure this all out, because I was beginning to feel unsafe. I went to bed and waited for Aaron to do his usual routine. He opened his bedroom door and walked over to mine. Then, as soon as I heard him unlock and open the other door, I got up and quickly went into the hallway, catching him standing by the open door. He looked back at me, clearly startled. "Hey, is everything okay, Aaron?" I asked. He just stared at me, eyes still open wide from the scare I gave him. "Why do you keep going to that door every night?" I broke the silence, getting impatient. We were standing on opposite sides of the long, dark hallway, but I could sense that something was wrong with him. We stared at each other still, and I took a step closer. "Aaron?" As soon as I spoke his name, he ran around the corner and straight to the back door, opening it and continuing to run for the trees. I looked out the back door, seeing him disappear into the dark woods. I was shaking, horrified at what just happened. I have no words to describe the unknown thoughts running through my head. I closed the back door, then grabbed a knife from the kitchen and walked over to the door Aaron had opened. It was in fact a basement, but there was no light switch and it clearly had not been renovated like the rest of the house. The walls were old, decaying wood. I debated whether or not to go down. I was so intrigued and curious, but terrified as well. The longer I stood there, the more afraid I became. I turned and ran back to my room, packed everything I could into 2 suitcases, stuffed them in my car, and drove away, never looking back. I never talked to Aaron again, and he never tried to contact me either. I didn't know what was going on with him, or what he was doing in that house, but I didn't want to be involved. After a while, I forgot about it, but almost 5 years later, I found myself wondering about it again. I looked up the house online and found some strange things. It had been torn down years ago. There was an article from 5 years ago, just a few months after I left, stating that the house was abandoned. To me, this meant that when Aaron ran away that night, he never came back. I kept reading, and it stated that the house was torn down due to what they described as criminal findings. It didn't go into any more detail about what those criminal findings were. This really had me shaken up for a few weeks. Things like this probably wouldn't happen nowadays, but you can never be too careful. I'm a 25-year-old male, and this happened to me 3 years ago. I had just signed a lease for a small house in the town I lived in. Having been living in an apartment for a few years, I didn't have a lot of furniture or large house decorations to fill the space in my rental. While I had a decent-sized couch and TV stand, I only had a mini TV that I wanted to put up in my bedroom since it was so small. Not having a ton of money to work with though, I took to Craigslist to find a larger TV for the living room. I found a few nice flat-screen TVs listed on the site. They were all over my budget though, and honestly, a lot nicer than I actually needed. I just wanted a large TV to fill the space in my living room. I didn't actually care about the quality of the picture on the TV. Anyway, I finally found one that seemed to work with what I needed. It was cheap, large, and was said to be in working condition. It was an old flat-screen TV from probably 10 years ago. Compared to today, they aren't even considered flat screens anymore, as they're usually 3 to 4 inches thick and really heavy. I sent the owner an email and continued with my search. Finding nothing else worth looking into, I just hoped for the best with that one TV. It wasn't until the following morning that I received a response to my email. The owner introduced himself as Mitch and said he'd love to show me the TV whenever I was available. I don't know if I just read it in a weird way or what, but he seemed to be over the top excited about this. It made me a little uncomfortable, but I just figured it was a happy old man or something. I said I could do any day this week after I got off work at 6, and Mitch said tomorrow at 6:30 would be perfect for him, leaving his address at the bottom of the email, along with a Google Calendar invite to an event labeled as Craigslist TV. I accepted it, though I wasn't really sure what the purpose of it was, and it was definitely not a normal thing people do, but it didn't affect me in any way. I got my truck emptied out, and the next day I went to work, then went straight to his address afterwards. It was dark out by now, and when I pulled into his driveway, I saw all the lights were on inside. I checked one last time to make sure I had all the cash on hand, then got out of my truck and went to the front door. Walking up, I could see that the front door was partially open. There was no screen door or anything, just one main door. Thinking it was left open for me, I leaned over and peeked inside, but didn't see anyone, so I rang the doorbell. Right when the bell rang, I heard something drop on the far end of the house. Then it went quiet. There was something about that noise that made me start getting nervous. After a moment, I decided I had a bad feeling about this and was just going to leave. But then footsteps came from behind the door, which then opened slightly wider, revealing a man. "Need something?" he said, half his body still behind the door. Yeah, I was here to look at your TV. We scheduled for 6:30 today." The man looked at me for a second. "All right." He opened the door completely and let me inside. I will say, at that moment, I knew something was wrong. He wasn't acting at all like he was in the emails. I expected a happy old man, not a large, grumpy, middle-aged dude, but I was already inside by the time all the alarms were going off in my head. The TV was in the room right next to the door, so he stood there while I looked at it. Yeah, this looks good. I'll take it," I said, not even knowing if it worked or not, but I wanted to get this over with quickly. I held out the money. He looked at it for a moment, then back at me. He reached out and took it, then shoved it in his pocket, and without giving me any time to react, he grabbed me by the shoulder and shoved me back towards the door, yelling at me to leave. I didn't argue. I sprinted out to my truck and drove away. Not long after, I pulled to the side and called the police to let them know I'd been robbed. The whole time, I was just thinking about how stupid they were, meeting me at their own house, robbing me, and letting me go, knowing that I knew where they lived. But when the police got to the house and called me back, I was in complete shock hearing what they told me. Over that week, though, things became more clear. The man I met at the house was not Mitch. Mitch, the owner of the house, was found unconscious in the kitchen. Thankfully, he survived, though he had some pretty bad injuries. The man I met at the door was another customer Mitch was meeting from Craigslist to pick up some kitchenware he was also selling. He ended up beating and robbing Mitch, likely just minutes before I showed up. What's even crazier is that Mitch had sent that man a Google Calendar invite as well, and the man accepted it, probably unknowing that it showed his email, which just so happened to be his first and last name. He was caught within a few days. During this whole case, I got to actually meet Mitch, and he was indeed a happy old man, even despite what happened to him.